a pumpkin carved for harvest drips, not seeds, but blood. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love reading them. Wolfe's chilling case begins now. If you want to disturb the sanctity of Nero Wolfe's brownstone, you don't kick the door or shout through the mail slot. You accomplish more with a cardboard crate, a bad sense of humor, and gravity. I was in the office inventorying Wolfe's drinking schedule, a task known to civilians as counting beer, when the bell rang. It was 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. Fritz was in the kitchen massaging honesty and time into a chicken that had lived a moral life. Theodore was with the orchids upstairs, and Wolfe was in his chair, garrisoning 38 square inches of upholstery with his right elbow. He had just concluded an exchange with a book on Montenegrin folk sayings and was trying not to begin another. I went to the door. We don't get many couriers. People who send things to Nero Wolfe are a select tribe consisting mostly of publishers, wine merchants, and men who attach numbers to the ends of their names. This one wore a bicycle helmet, a scowl, and a chain of perspiration down his nose. He handed me a tablet to sign and backed away as if I might explode. The crate he left was the kind you ship something alive in, with air holes that backed up their claim. "Archie," Wolfe called, not because he was interested, but because there had been a bell, and that's his idea of engagement. "Something for the house," I told him, dragging it over the threshold. "If it's a pig, Fritz will want an introduction." I used my pocket knife on the twine and then the tape. Beneath straw, there was a burlap sack. Beneath the sack, there was a pumpkin, and not the cheap, lopsided kind you get on a grocery bin next to kids and dental regrets. This was a serious pumpkin, deep-ribbed, burnished and heavy, the color of expensive sunset. I admired it in a masculine way and then noticed the wetness. A spot the size of a $50 glistened on the rind near the stem, so red it made the orange look shy. As I watched, the spot swelled and ran, a thin thread of color streaming down the curve. It wasn't paint, and it wasn't good company for a Persian rug. "Fritz!" I yelled. "Towel!" Wolfe didn't move, which is not a sentence you can use to tell time by, but the way he didn't move changed. He grew taller by staying seated, which is a trick he keeps for special occasions. "Archie." "I see it," I said, and I did. The pumpkin was bleeding. I had dragged it in, so now our hallway had acquired an exclamation mark that would not improve with age. Fritz arrived with the towel and the expression of a man who can make a Gâteau Saint-Honoré on instinct, but craves adult supervision when blood appears where pumpkins are concerned. We propped the crate lid under one side as a makeshift basin and tucked the towel to limit damage. Used my handkerchief to blot the leak. The red was thin, more like juice than anything heroic. I would have tasted it, purely for science, if Wolfe hadn't said my name again. "Don't be a goat, Archie." He was frowning at the pumpkin the way he frowns at a fly that has cleared airspace over his beer. I turned the thing an inch and saw, close to the leak, a hole the size of a pencil tip. It looked punctual and artificial. "If this is a performance piece," I told the crate, "the artist owes us a rug." There was a card tied around the stem with tan twine, the kind you could picture strangling an alibi. I slipped it off. The card stock was good. Cream, the typewritten kind you rent for ransom notes. 4 words. "You are not invited." Under that, in ink as tidy as a school teacher's, a single word, Harrow. "What am I not invited to?" I asked the card, which was silent about it. Wolfe's eyelids did an old trick. They reminded me of stage curtains, considering the audience. "Put it in the kitchen sink," he said, gently. "Tell Fritz to flush the area with cold water, then bring me the card." I got the pumpkin to the sink with Fritz fretting around me like a small, devoted planet. The stream of red was neither increasing nor slowing, which is the kind of consistency you don't appreciate until you own a hallway. I handed the card to Wolfe, and he weighed it as if truth had mass. "Harrow," he said. "A name, or a verb, or a tool. I can think of a fourth category, I said. A practical joker with a budget. If this is a joke, he said, the comedian is ill-trained. Our threshold was maligned. That was true. The threshold is the line between Wolfe's peace and the world's noise, and it doesn't appreciate being used as a prop. The bell rang again. I was closer, which is why I opened it instead of letting Wolfe solve the problem from his chair. The woman on the stoop wore a charcoal suit that managed to be severe without surrendering. She had fair hair compacted into a twist, a nose like good punctuation, and eyes that had done their homework. She was 2 seconds ahead of the introduction. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I'm Dr. Lenora Voss. May I come in? I apologize in advance for the pumpkin. It was the only way to make sure I got in the door." "That's one approach," I said. "We can talk about the others after we post a cleaning bill. Come in." She stepped over the place where her apology met the rug. I closed the door and brought her down the hall into the office, where Wolfe was waiting to demonstrate the philosophy of mass at rest. She glanced at him and then at the room. The globe, the desk, the wall of books that behave themselves, the one chair that expects expectations. Her face adjusted. First relief, then determination. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, and let it be an acknowledgement rather than a plea. Wolfe inclined 2 degrees. "You sent an unclean object into my house." "I did," she said evenly, "to demonstrate that someone sent one into my life and that I can no longer keep it from making a mess." I liked her for not shrinking. Wolfe likes not being asked to like anyone, which is a different thing. He gestured at the red Moroccan chair that looks better than it feels. She sat, compact and ready. "State your business," he said. She folded her hands. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous sponsor pledged $2 million to the Belgrave Institute of Botanical Nutrition, my institute, for a 4-year research project. We study plant-derived dyes and their crossover into safe food applications. Anthocyanins, betalains, carotenoids. We're not creating monsters. We're returning color to food that big companies bleach and fake. The pledge was conditioned on a demonstration at our annual Harvest Gala. The sponsor wanted a provocation. She took a breath. We planned a pumpkin that bleeds. "You are a scientist," Wolfe said, "and you block your own path. Continue." "It would not bleed blood," she said. "It would exude a red anthocyanin concentrate through a microfracture when the stem was twisted. Safe, natural, a showpiece. Think of cutting into a steak and seeing a ruby river. Think of a chef's theater. We designed a membrane, a reservoir, a controlled release, and then, last Friday, someone accessed our prototype locker. Our security logs are intact. Our cameras show nothing. But the next morning, a test pumpkin bled from an unfamiliar puncture, and the fluid was not ours. It tested positive for animal hemoglobin." "Bovine?" I asked. "Porcine," she said. "Cheap, plentiful. Someone tampered with the reservoir and seeded a message. The message went to the press, anonymously. Frankenfood bleeding real blood. And to me, with a warning not to proceed. The signature was Harrow." "And the crate?" I asked. "A demonstration," she said. "And a trap, but not mine. This morning I received an email. You can't ignore what you let out. Admit the lie. Cancel the gala, or I'll bleed your work where it will stain." The email provided a tracking number for a delivery service. It said the address would be close enough to home to teach manners. When I entered it, it was your address by 2 digits. I was to watch the tracking and come running. I came. I'm sorry I involved your carpet. I couldn't risk not coming. "Risk," Wolfe said, and made it sound like a flavor he found too sharp. She faced him cleanly. "My work depends on trust. I have donors, students, and a field that wants to be taken seriously. Whoever Harrow is, they either hate me, hate the work, or think they can take it. I need to know which, and I need to stop them. The gala is in 3 days. Wolfe closed his eyes. There are men who close their eyes to rest and men who close their eyes to open them. Wolfe belongs to the latter fraternity, which has very strict membership. He sat like a mountain that had decided to observe erosion. "What you propose," he said without opening them, "is hurried." "It is," she said, "but it isn't optional." "Everything," he said, now opening them, "is optional until one decides. Who knew of your plan?" "Inside the Institute? Myself, my deputy, Dr. Mason Worth, our security head, Violet Kwan, our lead technician, Palmer Kells, and a visiting chef, Asta Devine, contracted to stage the demonstration. Outside, the anonymous sponsor's legal representative, a firm called Harrow and Lip. They insisted on seeing preliminary designs. We refused specifics, but gave a summary. "Harrow," I said. Dr. Voss nodded. "I thought of that. Harrow and Lip is real. Old firm, corporate clients, no obvious history of pranks. They claim ignorance. Harrow could be an attempt to frame them, or a joke with teeth." Wolfe's finger tapped the armrest once. The sound was a judge rapping to signal that silence ought to be interesting. "What is the lure?" he asked. "I can pay your fee," she said. "Beyond that, if we survive, you can have first refusal on any culinary application we produce. Colors, extracts, presentations you can't eat anywhere else. Exclusive dinners. Mr. Wolfe, I've read about Fritz Brenner. He could paint with this." Fritz, if he had been in the doorway, would have circled the block from pleasure. Wolfe instead peered at me as if I had rearranged the furniture without permission. His nostrils flared the way they do when the idea of novelty attempts to sneak through his disdain. He closed that admission with a glance. "Archie," he said, "fetch a saucer." I went to the kitchen and came back with a saucer, a spoon, and a mental note to order a promised rug cleaner by the gallon. Under Wolfe's direction, I brought a teaspoon of the red fluid from the sink. Fritz had put the pumpkin under cold water, and it was sulking quietly. I set the spoon on Wolfe's desk blotter. The red trembled like a nervous witness. Wolfe leaned forward, a movement which means it had better matter, and sniffed. He did not taste. He does not taste in front of clients unless he intends to buy the farm, the county, and the horse. "Not blood," he pronounced, "or not entirely. There's sugar, beet or cane, and something floral. Hibiscus." He flicked me a look. I wrote it down. There may be a trace of gelatin. Voss exhaled. "Then the hemoglobin test could still be true," Wolfe said. "It could be both. A simulacrum reinforced with a token of the real, to maximize disgust while disguising origin. Whoever tampered is a dramatist who cannot resist redundancy. I distrust dramatists. They lack economy." He set down the spoon and made the movement I associate with acceptance. The tiniest shift of weight, imperceptible unless you live with the man and notice that glaciers, at some point, decide a direction. "I will accept you," he said. "I can count on my fingers the number of times a client has gotten a plain declarative sentence from Wolfe at the start." Dr. Voss didn't smile. She let her lungs handle it. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," he said. "I accept you, not your schedule. 3 days is a vulgarity, but vulgarities can be endured if they are instructive. You will deposit a retainer with Mr. Goodwin. Archie." "Yes, sir." "Telephone Saul Panzer and request his presence within the hour. Notify Mr. Cather and Mr. Darkened that their services may be required." His eyes returned to Voss. "You will provide a list of all who had access to your prototype locker in the past 2 weeks. All, Dr. Voss, including janitors and delivery men. You will also furnish the preliminary materials you sent to Harrow and Lip, unredacted, and a diagram of your reservoir and membrane design." She nodded. "I have them with me, on a drive." "Good," he said. "You will leave them. You will then go home and wait. You will not cancel your gala. You will not speak of this engagement to anyone but those I tell you to. The more your saboteur believes you are cornered, the more zealous he will be. Zealots expose themselves when their zeal is thwarted. She folded and unfolded her hands once, considering. If the saboteur escalates, I am not a policeman, Wolfe said. If he commits a crime, you will inform the proper authorities and I will supply them with a rope of logic. I will not pursue him down an alley. If you require a man to be pursued down an alley, Mr. Goodwin can manage it, but he will be irritated, and I deplore irritation in my assistant. Especially when it's mine, I put in. She gave me a brief smile that said she had met irritation and taken its measure. I'll abide by your terms. I can't afford not to. Precisely, Wolfe said. She set a small envelope on my desk. The retainer, she said. And the drive. The list I'll email in an hour. It will be dry. Our security is thorough. Which doesn't mean it worked. Security, Wolfe said, is only as clever as the cleverest person it excludes. You have not excluded him or her. She stood. One last thing, she said, and her voice, which had been a clean edge, did something softer. Yesterday I found a second note under my office door, just one sentence. Seeds carry sins. I don't have sins to answer for, Mr. Wolfe, at least none related to my work. But someone wants me to think I do. If this is about theft or sabotage, I can fight that. If it's about shame. She stopped, and the suit did some work it wasn't designed for. I need to know which. Wolfe's eyes were very dark, which isn't a color description. If it is about shame, he said, it is about appetite. Appetite distorts judgment, in kitchens as in churches. We will see whose. She left with the efficiency of someone who knows where they are going when they don't know where they are going. I walked her to the door, and on the way she looked at the hallway, which was now merely damp instead of a melodramatic. I'll send money for cleaning, she said. You'll send names, I said. The money can wait. When I came back into the office, Wolfe was looking at the card again. You are not invited. He set it down and pressed the bell for beer with one finger, as if ordering a battalion. You took her, I said, not making it a question, but letting it wear the same coat. You hate 3-day deadlines. I despise them, he agreed, but I loathe presumption more. Harrow strolled into my house and Bled on my threshold to summon me like a lackey. If I refuse, he will believe he has denied me my will. If I accept, and I have, I deny him his. You're doing this to spite a man who can pick a tracking number. I'm doing this, he said, because Harrow, whether man, woman, or firm, committed 2 improprieties I cannot ignore. He trespassed where I live, and he mishandled metaphor. Seeds carry sins. Bah. Sententious twaddle. He thinks in sermons and touches food. He must be corrected. Fritz appeared with the beer, and Wolfe took it the way he takes a reason to live. He sipped, closed his eyes, and reopened them on me. Archie. Saul. Then the Institute. You will visit and be unimpressed by how carefully they failed. Speak to Dr. Voss's deputy and her security head first. Sniff, but do not bark. Notice what does not wish to be noticed, and ask for a tour of this visiting chef's domain, Astor Devane. If he is what his name promises, I will pity his mother. You want me to start with the kitchen? I always start with the kitchen, he said. If a man wishes to meddle with appetite, he leaves crumbs. He lifted the spoon again and glanced at the red smear drying on the edge. Also, acquire a new hallway rug. Order 2. Yes, sir. I phoned Saul Panzer and left a message that made it clear that gravity had increased on 20th Street. He called back before I hung up and said he was on his way, which is what Saul says when the job smells of brains and the money isn't shy. 10 minutes later, I put on my hat, checked my notebook, and went out into an afternoon that had decided to pretend it was October for a change. On the stoop, I bent to look at the top step. The water had washed most of the red away, leaving a faint blush that would make future deliveries nervous. Across the street, a kid with a skateboard glanced at me. Then at the pumpkin story I must have written on my face, and then rode off to tell it his way. I looked back at the door, where Wolfe's privacy had met a gourd. Inside, Wolfe was finishing his beer and planning to dominate a problem without standing. Outside, I was headed to meet a woman who'd been told she wasn't invited to her own work and a saboteur who wanted to direct the seating chart. It was a good division of labor. He would sit and instruct, and I would walk and find the places where Red had no right to run. If you're keeping track, that's how a pumpkin bleeds into a case. And if you think it's ridiculous, you're not wrong. But ridiculous is just another way of saying something has more nerve than it can account for. I was in the mood to see who it belonged to. Saul arrived in 40 minutes flat, which for him was practically lazy, but he brought with him the kind of steady competence that makes up for any lag. I briefed him in the front hall so Wolfe wouldn't have to waste breath on repetition. Saul listened, didn't blink at the notion of a pumpkin hemorrhaging porcine fluid, and said, "All right, you want me to track outside pressure points or inside?" "Inside first," I told him. "Voss's Institute, names on a list. You know the drill. Watch for quiet ones who smile too fast." He nodded, which in Saul's vocabulary was an oath, and headed out. I gave Wolfe the report, and he grunted as if an elephant had stepped on his approval. Then he waved me toward the door with a kind of gesture that says the chessboard requires pawns. By the time I reached the Belgrave Institute of Botanical Nutrition, the afternoon had developed that brittle edge Manhattan gets in October when the sunlight is golden but the breeze insists on reminding you about November. The Institute's building was modern glass stacked on top of good old brownstone bones, a hybrid that looked like it had been designed by a committee of donors with competing visions of prestige. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus, probably pumped in to make you feel nourished. The receptionist, a young man with the kind of posture you get from scrolling on your phone for a living, directed me to the second floor. "Dr. Worth and Miss Kwan have been expecting you," he said, though he didn't look like he believed anyone could be expected in this place. Dr. Mason Worth's office had the personality of an underfunded lecture hall. He was a thin man with a fringe of hair around a shiny dome, glasses that perched rather than clung, and the sort of careful smile that suggested he practiced it for mirrors. He rose as I came in, shook my hand limply, and gestured to a chair that looked like it had once been part of an airport. "Archie Goodwin," he said, "Nero Wolfe's assistant. We're grateful you've come." "That's the second time today I've been thanked before I've done anything," I told him. "It sets a high bar." He adjusted his glasses, a nervous tick. "Dr. Voss briefed me. I still can't believe someone would sabotage our project so crudely, using real blood. It's grotesque." "Grotesque, but effective," I said. "That's the point. Tell me about your role." "I oversee research strategy. Lenora, Dr. Voss, handles funding and vision. I ensure the lab keeps its course. Palmer Kells manages day-to-day technical execution, and Violet Kwan oversees physical security." "And you personally," I asked, "had access to the prototypes?" "Of course. But so did others. Our work depends on collaboration." He said it smoothly, but I noticed his left hand had started worrying a cuff button as if it had secrets hidden inside. I filed it. Next was Violet Kwan, head of security. She met me in a conference room rather than her office, which was a neat trick. It meant she controlled the ground. She was compact, mid-30s, her black hair cut in a straight line at her jaw, her expression honed like steel. "I don't enjoy outside interference," she said by way of greeting, "but Dr. Voss insists, and it is her institute." "That's one way to say hello," I replied. "Don't worry, I'm not here to review your logs or confiscate your keys. I just want to know who had an easier time than they should have." "No one," she said flatly. "Our system is sound. Biometric locks, camera coverage, electronic logs. If something went missing or was tampered with, the perpetrator either had clearance or resources that mimic it." That narrows it to your friends or very expensive enemies, I said. Her eyes narrowed back. I've already investigated our staff. If one of them did this, they're better at covering tracks than I am at finding them, and I don't accept that easily. I believed her. Too much bite to be false. But belief isn't the same as exoneration. I asked to see the locker where the prototypes had been stored. She walked me down herself. The corridor smelled faintly metallic, the way labs do when stainless steel and disinfectant compete. The locker was a climate-controlled unit, with a keypad and biometric pad gleaming beside it. Logs show only 4 entries in the last week, she said. Dr. Voss, Dr. Worth, Palmer Kells, and myself. No anomalies, no duplicates. Which means one of the 4 of you is lying, I said, or someone cleverer is playing outside the logs. Her lips tightened. I don't like implications without evidence. Neither does Wolfe, I said. But implications are what keep the lights on until evidence decides to show. She didn't smile. When she left me, I prowled the locker door, ran a hand along the edge, checked the keypad for scratches or residue. Nothing obvious. But I'd been around enough jobs to know you don't need scratches when you've got access. My next stop was the demonstration kitchen, a showpiece space gleaming with chrome counters and overhead lights. There, I found Astor Devine. If the name was a stage, he was playing it to the balcony. Tall, with hair he clearly thought deserved its own agent, he wore a chef's jacket tailored tighter than most dinner dates. He was slicing persimmons with the flourish of a magician, unveiling a rabbit. "Ah," he said, spotting me. "The detective's man. Do you come to sample art or to accuse?" "Neither," I told him. "I come to listen." "Then prepare for poetry," he said, gesturing to the fruit. "Food is theater, and this project, oh, this bleeding pumpkin, is the greatest act yet. But tragedy, it seems, entered stage left." "Sabotage isn't poetry," I said. "It's mess with a motive." "What's yours?" He laughed, too loud. "Motive? My only motive is beauty. If someone corrupted this, they are a vandal. I am an artist. Voss believes in me. Worth tolerates me. Quan mistrusts me. That is the chorus. If you wish to hear more, you must buy a ticket." I made a note to mention to Wolfe that Astor Devine talked like a man auditioning for his own obituary. By the time I left the Institute, the sun was bruising its way down behind the buildings, and my notebook was fuller than my patience. Voss had given me her list. Worth had given me nervous hands. Quan had given me cold certainty, and Devine had given me hot air. Somewhere in that mix was a saboteur who thought blood was a punchline. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, chair-bound and immovable, the card with "You are not invited" still on his desk like a chess piece he wasn't finished moving. I reported, detail by detail. He listened, eyelids lowered, occasionally interrupting with a grunt or a clipped "pfui." When I finished, he tapped the card once and said, "We have 4. They will do. Now, Archie, let us see which of them believes metaphor makes him clever." It wasn't an answer, but it was a direction. And with Wolfe, that meant the hunt had officially begun. Wolfe didn't speak right away, which was his way of making my report hang in the air until it felt like testimony. He picked up the spoon still carrying the faint, dried streak of the pumpkin's offering, inspected it with the disdain most men reserve for spoiled wine, and set it back down. His eyes closed, not for sleep, but for digestion of a different sort. "Archie," he said finally, "you noted the deputy's hands." Yeah, Worth kept worrying his cuff button like it was a confession booth. Nervous, but I couldn't decide if it was guilt or just him living up to the stereotype of a man in glasses who never won a fist fight. "Guilt is seldom so cooperative as to wiggle itself into the open," Wolfe murmured. "But nerves, when repeated, wear grooves that can be traced. What of Ms. Quan?" "Steel, locked tight. If someone slipped past her system, it either wasn't her fault or she refuses to admit it was. I wouldn't bet against her temper if she thought I was pointing the finger her way." He opened one eye. And Divine? Hot air at premium rates. Talks like Shakespeare's stage was his living room. If he had anything to do with the sabotage, it'll be wrapped in 6 layers of metaphor and arrogance. I almost admire his commitment. That leaves Palmer Kells, Wolfe said. I leaned back. Didn't get to him yet. He wasn't on site when I called. They said he'd been working late in the labs and left early, which is either dedication or a convenient alibi. Wolfe grunted. Convenient alibis often belong to the guilty, but not exclusively. Pfui. Saul will find if Kells spent his time in earnest or in invention. As if on cue, the bell rang. I went and found Saul standing with his calm face and a notebook in his breast pocket. We settled him into the red chair, and Wolfe, without preamble, demanded, "Well?" Saul gave his report with his usual efficiency. He'd tailed Voss back to her apartment, a practical midtown place with decent security and a lot of mail from donors in the wastebasket. She had spent the evening working at her desk. No visitors, no calls beyond 2 to the Institute. Worth, on the other hand, had left shortly after I did, stopped at a pharmacy for antacids, and then went home to a neat row house where, according to Saul's eyes through the window, he poured 3 fingers of scotch, sat down, and stared into it like it held theorems. Kwan had driven to a gym, spent 40 minutes boxing a bag into regret, and then returned to her apartment alone. Devine had been the most theatrical of the lot, going to a wine bar, entertaining 2 women with stories that involved more adjectives than verbs, and then vanishing into the back with one of them. Saul followed just long enough to confirm the woman wasn't on staff at the Institute. He didn't pursue further, partly because Devine was predictable, and partly because Saul has limits. Wolfe digested this with a grimace that meant none of it contradicted his assumptions, which was almost as bad as if it had. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow morning you will go back. You will find Palmer Kells. Engage him as you did the others. You will also contrive to be shown their laboratory proper. I want your eyes on the equipment. Pay heed to redundancies. Who repeats tasks? Who rechecks? Who insists upon control? Sabotage in a laboratory is not only about intrusion, but also about interference with habit. A man who must always adjust the valve may be the one who adjusted it when he ought not. And if Kells doesn't want to chat? Then you will charm him," Wolfe said, and the way he said it suggested my charm was as compulsory as Fritz's use of salt. The evening wore on in the usual brownstone rhythm. Wolfe with his books, Fritz restoring the kitchen to dignity, me recording notes and lining up tomorrow's appointments. At 10, Wolfe called it a day, but not before issuing the kind of pronouncement that turns into marching orders. "This Harrow," he said, "is either a coward behind a mask or a zealot with one. Both are predictable if one has the wit to notice their rhythm. I will not tolerate his presumption. By the time he seeks to bleed again, we will know from which vein." The next morning found me back at the Institute, greeted with the same citrus-scented air and the same receptionist, who looked marginally more awake. I asked for Palmer Kells and was led down to a basement lab, where the light was harsher and the air thicker. Kells was there, all right. Mid-40s, shoulders broad, his lab coat hanging loose like it had been borrowed. He was hunched over a bench, measuring out powders into labeled vials, and didn't look up when I entered. "You're Goodwin," he said without turning. His voice was low, flat. "Voss said you'd be coming." "That's me, and you're Kells. I'd shake your hand, but I don't want to end up glowing in the dark." That earned me a brief flicker of a smile, quick as a match. Then it was gone. "You want to know who sabotaged us? I don't know, but I can tell you it wasn't me. I put too much into this." "Too much?" I asked. He set down a vial and finally looked at me. His eyes were the kind that carried tiredness like luggage. "Time. Years. I was a food chemist for a big manufacturer before this. Coloring everything with synthetics because it was cheap. Got tired of selling fakery. Came here to make something real. If someone wants to ruin that, they're not just attacking Voss. They're spitting on me." That sounded sincere, which of course meant nothing. Sincerity is free and easy to fake. Still, there was weight behind his words, the kind that comes from dragging regret uphill. "Tell me about the locker incident," I pressed. "I checked it 2 mornings before the bleed. Everything normal. The next day, Voss came running down with the punctured pumpkin. I didn't touch it between those days. Anyone else hanging around the lab off hours?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Divine likes to wander. He says he wants to inhale inspiration. I've chased him out twice. That nugget had Wolfe's name written all over it, a man with access and an ego, drifting into labs like a poet into cafes. I asked a few more questions, got flat answers, and left with the sense Kells was either the most honest man I'd met that week or the most exhausted liar. Either way, it was worth reporting. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, my gut told me the game was just warming up. Somewhere between Worth's nerves, Quan's steel, Kells's sincerity, and Divine's theatrics, Harrow was lurking. And if Wolfe was right, and he usually is, then the pumpkin was just the appetizer. The main course was still coming, and someone intended it to stain. I reported back that evening, and Wolfe listened with the immobility of a mountain that has grown ears. When I finished, he sat in silence long enough for me to wonder if he was asleep. Then he opened his eyes, the way curtains draw back on a stage where the audience had forgotten the play had begun. "Kells is not irrelevant," he said. "His sincerity may be genuine, or it may be rehearsed. But his resentment is unmistakable. Men who abandon industry for conscience can grow prickly when their virtue is tested." "Sure," I said, "but prickly doesn't equal porcine hemoglobin in a pumpkin." "It does not," Wolfe conceded, "but it offers a temperament. Combine temperament with access, and you have potential." He leaned back, folded his hands on the mound of his middle, and regarded the ceiling. Yet Divine wandering unsupervised in the laboratory is intolerable. A man who thinks himself an artist believes rules are for lesser men. That presumption is fertile ground for mischief. "Add a dash of narcissism and you've got yourself a recipe," I said. "Pui. Recipes, I understand. This is theatre, and theatre must be curtailed." Wolfe frowned as if the word itself was indigestible. "Archie, tomorrow you will contrive to speak further with Miss Quan. She is too certain. Excess certainty masks a fissure. I wish to know what she does not wish to know." That was Wolfe's way of saying I should poke until something rattled loose. I nodded, knowing my assignment was set. The next morning I returned to the Institute and found Violet Quan in her office this time. It was a small space, but ordered to the inch. Files lined up like soldiers, a bonsai tree trimmed within an inch of its life, and a calendar that looked more like a blueprint. She motioned me to sit, but didn't smile. "You again," she said. "What are you hoping to find that I haven't?" "An admission," I said cheerfully. "Not yours necessarily, but maybe the one you've been holding off on because it would stain your record." Her jaw tightened. "I don't hold back. If I'd found fault, I would have reported it. Even if it was yours." That landed. Her eyes flickered just once, quick enough to pass unnoticed if I hadn't been trained to spot nerves like bird dogs spot feathers. "I do not sabotage my own system," she said, voice iron again. "Didn't say you did. But systems break, and when they do, the head of security has to decide if she admits the breach or covers it with pride." Her nostrils flared and she leaned back. The logs were clean, but there was one anomaly. A blip on a camera feed outside the prototype room. 2 minutes of static, then normal. I told Voss it was inconsequential. "And why didn't you tell me yesterday?" "Because I don't like giving strangers ammunition. And because I still don't know if it was a glitch or deliberate tampering. But since you're going to find out anyway, there it is." That was better than an admission. It was a crack in the facade. I pressed, "Which camera?" "The one covering the eastern corridor. But there's a blind spot between it and the lab door. If someone wanted to slip in, those 2 minutes would have been their moment." "Neat coincidence," I said. "I don't believe in coincidences," she replied. "But I also don't believe in accusing without proof." I thanked her, left with that nugget burning in my notebook, and decided my next stop had to be the lab again. If someone had slipped in during the static, I wanted to see where they might have gone. The lab was quieter that morning. Kells was absent, and only 2 junior assistants were bent over benches, working with the solemnity of monks. I made small talk, then drifted toward the locker room where the prototypes had been kept. This time I checked the floor carefully. Near the edge of the locker, wedged almost invisible against the baseboard, was a sliver of something metallic. I crouched, fished it out with a pen. It was the broken end of a syringe needle. That earned a low whistle. I pocketed it, thanked the universe for small favors, and left before anyone noticed my find. Back at the brownstone, I laid the fragment on Wolfe's desk. He lifted it between thumb and forefinger, sniffed, and grunted. "Not ordinary," he said. "A veterinary gauge. Large enough for fluid transfer. Whoever used this was no stranger to needles. Kells, perhaps, with his industry background. Or someone who knew where to shop." "And they dropped the end like a calling card," I said. "No," Wolfe corrected. "They dropped it because arrogance dulls caution. It is always thus." He tapped the fragment on his blotter. "This is not merely sabotage. It is declaration. Harrow means to scourge. He seeks to scourge Voss, to shame her before her peers. That is more than theft. It is vendetta." Before I could respond, the phone rang. I picked it up and found Dr. Voss on the line, her voice tight. "Sir, Mr. Goodwin, there's been another intrusion. Someone broke into my office last night. They left nothing missing, but on my desk I found a note. One line again. Harvests rot from the root." I relayed it to Wolfe, who closed his eyes and muttered, "Pfui." Then, louder, "Dr. Voss, do not touch the note further. Archie will collect it." When I hung up, Wolfe was frowning into the middle distance. "This Harrow grows impatient. That is good. Impatience is the crack through which truth seeps. Archie, fetch the note, and tell Saul to watch the gala's suppliers. A zealot will not stop with words. He will arrange a stage for his sermon." I grabbed my hat and headed out, the weight of the syringe fragment in my pocket and Wolfe's words in my head. The saboteur was tightening the net, but so were we. And if Wolfe was right, the gala wasn't just a deadline anymore. It was bait. ChatGPT said, I arrived at Voss's office before noon, escorted by a junior assistant who looked like she hadn't slept since Y2K. The room itself was orderly, in the way academics like to believe means control. Bookshelves stacked with titles about pigments and nutrition, a desk polished to the point of gilt, and a wall chart that looked more like a genealogy of carrots than anything else. The note was waiting exactly where she'd said, centered on her blotter like it had reserved a seat. It was typed like the others, the same cream cardstock. The line, harvests rot from the root, sat in the middle as if it had nowhere else to be. I used my pen to slide it into an envelope, then looked around the office. No sign of forced entry, no broken locks. Either someone had her keys, or someone had her trust. Nothing taken? I asked. Not a thing, she said. The drawers were untouched, the files intact. It was only the note. That's the point, I told her. They're not after your data. They're after your nerves. She pressed her lips tight, and I could see the fight it took for her not to let it show. She was made of tough stock, but nobody likes their sanctuaries breached. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the envelope. He didn't touch it directly, just peered at it as if his gaze alone could peel it apart. The language is consistent, didactic. Whoever writes these fancies himself a prophet. Fui, a boor dressed as a poet. Still a bore with keys to Voss's office, I said. Or with her confidence, Wolfe added. He shifted in his chair, which was as close as he comes to pacing. We have 4 within her circle. Which of them traffics in metaphor? Divine prattles, Worth trembles, Quan denies, Kells resents. Each could write, but which would? The bell rang again. Fritz went to answer, and a moment later ushered in Saul Panzer. He didn't waste time. The suppliers check out, he said. Produce deliveries, floral arrangements, kitchen rentals, nothing out of place. But someone tried to insert themselves into the catering crew last night. A man with forged credentials, name listed as Harrow. They caught it in verification and refused him. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Impatience again. Saul sat, folding his hands. That kind of move is sloppy. Either he's desperate or he wants to be noticed. Both, Wolfe said. A zealot who fears his sermon will not be heard shouts louder. Archie, fetch me the names of all on Dr. Voss's gala committee. I wish to see if our saboteur has left another trail in that company. I phoned Voss and got the list. The names were predictable. Worth, Quan, Kells, Devine, a handful of donors, and 2 administrative assistants. Wolfe scanned it, set it down, and closed his eyes again. The punctured pumpkin was theatre. The notes are theatre. The attempted infiltration, theatre. The man believes he directs a play with Voss as his antagonist. Archie, he will not stop. He will escalate until the gala itself becomes his stage. Therefore, we will allow him to believe he has succeeded. That had the ring of trouble. You want to bait him? Yes. We will furnish him opportunity. The more extravagant the stage, the more he will betray his hand. Wolfe's tone was calm, which was worse than if he'd raised it. Arrange tomorrow for Devine to rehearse his demonstration in the Institute's kitchen. Insist upon all committee members observing under pretext of donor reassurance. Ensure security presence is discreet, not obvious. Harrow will not resist so public a moment. And if he tries something during rehearsal? Then we will catch him, Wolfe said simply. Better a rehearsal ruined than a gala disgraced. The next day I was back at the Institute, leaning against the gleaming counters while Esther Devine performed like the stage was lit and the orchestra tuned. He had the prototype pumpkin on the table, resplendent and whole. Worth stood nearby with his usual nerves, Quan with her arms folded, Kells stiff as iron, and Voss watching from the side, her jaw clenched. Devine took a paring knife, flourished it like a conductor's baton, and pierced the pumpkin at the seam. For a moment, nothing. Then a vivid red stream welled out, trickling across the table in a line so theatrical it might have been scripted. Behold, Devine said, spreading his arms, life's illusion, captured in fruit. Worth looked queasy. Quan's eyes narrowed. Kells muttered something under his breath. Voss stepped forward, but I caught her shoulder. Hold it, I murmured. Because I had seen it. Devine hadn't touched the stem, the supposed trigger. He'd gone straight for the side, carving into a hidden reservoir, which meant someone had set this one up deliberately, just as they had the crate pumpkin. The assistants gasped. The liquid smelled faintly metallic, more than just pigment. I dipped a finger and brought it to my nose. Definitely blood. Diluted but unmistakable. Quan barked orders, shoving the assistants back. Worth backed toward the door like a man allergic to scandal. Kells swore outright and slammed his fist against the counter. Devine just grinned as if the drama itself was his triumph. I bagged a sample in a vial and called Wolfe. When I described what had happened, he exhaled through his nose, a sound like a kettle preparing to scald. Archie, he said, bring the pumpkin here at once, and bring them all here tonight. My office will suffice for the stage. It is time Harrow was told his play is over. That was Wolfe's version of a curtain call. I knew what it meant. Every suspect in one room, Wolfe in his chair, and the truth dragged into the open by the throat. And this time, the bleeding pumpkin wasn't just a prop. It was evidence. And bait. Getting all of them into the brownstone that same evening was a logistical headache, but I've had worse. Wolfe wanted every suspect under his roof before midnight, which meant juggling egos, schedules, and the polite fiction that they weren't walking straight into a trap. I started with Voss. She agreed without hesitation, almost with relief. Worth resisted, pleading exhaustion and fragile digestion, but when I said Wolfe had found something, he couldn't afford to miss. He folded like damp paper. Quan tried to argue chain of command and security jurisdiction until I told her Wolfe didn't care about her chain, just about results. She came anyway. Kells barely said a word, but showed up on time, as if grim resolve had set his watch. Devine, of course, treated the invitation like a summons to the Tonys. He asked if he should bring his own spotlight. By 8 o'clock, they were all seated in Wolfe's office. Wolfe had arranged the chair so the suspects faced him like school children who hadn't done their homework. He sat, massive and unmoving, the pumpkin wrapped in burlap to save Fritz's nerves, resting on a side table. Fritz had retreated after serving coffee. Saul stood unobtrusively near the door, a reminder that nobody left until Wolfe dismissed them. Wolfe let silence reign for a solid 30 seconds. Silence is his favorite opening gambit. It stretches thin, and in the stretching, people betray themselves. Worth cleared his throat twice. Quan crossed her arms tighter. Kells stared at the floor. Devine smiled as though silence itself were his stage. Voss sat upright, watchful, the weight of her reputation balanced on the edge of Wolfe's words. Finally, Wolfe spoke. "You are here," he said, "because one among you is Harrow, or acts for him. He is a saboteur, a dramatist, and a coward. He has trespassed in my house, tampered with my client's work, and attempted to stain her with shame. He will not succeed." Worth's voice cracked. "If you know who it is, then say it. Why drag us all here like criminals?" "Because," Wolfe said, "criminals are most easily revealed when they believe they are actors in a play. Harrow has written himself a drama with pumpkins that bleed and aphorisms masquerading as prophecy. But he forgot one thing. Drama requires audience. Tonight, he has one." Devine chuckled. "Oh, how delicious. You speak as if we're characters." "You are," Wolfe said coldly, "and your roles are determined not by your choice, but by your deeds. Consider, each of you had access to the prototype. Each of you could have tampered with it, but the method of sabotage speaks loudly. The punctured reservoir, the use of animal hemoglobin, the broken syringe needle Archie discovered. That requires not only access, but familiarity with instruments." Quan's eyes flashed toward Kells. That would be his domain. Kells bristled. "I wouldn't risk everything I've built here. Whoever did this wants the Institute ruined, not advanced." Wolfe lifted a hand, and the room quieted. "Yes, Mr. Kells's resentment is genuine, but it is not Harrow's weapon. A man who seeks redemption does not bleed pigs into pumpkins. His grievances are personal, not theatrical." He turned his gaze on Worth. "Dr. Worth trembles because he fears scandal more than guilt. His nerves betray indigestion, not malice. He is a weak reed, not a saboteur." Worth sagged in visible relief, though he muttered something about unfair assumptions. "Ms. Quan," Wolfe continued, "you cling to certainty as if it were armor. Yet you withheld the camera anomaly until pressed. Why?" "Because I didn't want to accuse without proof," she shot back. "Indeed. And yet that restraint is the opposite of Harrow, who revels in accusation. No, your pride is not his voice." Devine spread his arms. "So you eliminate 3 and we are left with me. But surely, Mr. Wolfe, even you must see that artistry and sabotage are not synonyms. I bring beauty, not butchery." Wolfe's lips curved in something not quite a smile. "Mr. Devine, your tongue betrays you. Seeds carry sins. Harvests rot from the root. Such phrases drip with your self-indulgence. You speak always as though addressing an audience. Who else would choose to stage a performance with blood as pigment? Divine's grin faltered. That's hardly evidence. Anyone could write a phrase. True, Wolfe said, but not anyone would misuse metaphor so egregiously. You, however, delight in it, and you had opportunity, wandering the labs unsupervised, rehearsing your grand role. You did not simply want to sabotage Dr. Voss, you wanted to expose her as a fraud, to claim her work as spectacle while condemning it as grotesque. Your motive is vanity disguised as moral fervor. You are Harrow. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Then Kells slammed his hand on the armrest. I knew it, always strutting around like the Institute was his stage. Voss's face went pale, then hardened. Aster, why? You had a contract, a platform. You could have showcased with us. Why destroy it? Divine tried to recover his poise, but his smile had curdled. Because your science is hollow theater. You pretend purity, but it is all artifice. I merely gave the world the truth, blood where you promised color. Pfui, Wolfe spat, the word sharp as a slap. Truth does not require forgery. You are a charlatan who mistook sabotage for sermon, and you erred fatally in your arrogance. The syringe fragment, the puncture not aligned with your mechanism, the crude choice of porcine blood. These are not the marks of a visionary, but of a vandal. Your play is over. Saul stepped forward, and Divine shifted in his chair for the first time, looking cornered rather than commanding. Voss pressed a hand to her temple, as though fighting dizziness. Worth muttered something about disgrace. Quan's jaw was set in stone. Wolfe lifted his hand again, signaling the end. Mr. Goodwin, escort Mr. Divine from my house. Tomorrow, Dr. Voss will deliver him to the proper authorities. The gala will proceed, untainted. Let Harrow's sermon end in silence. Divine rose with a laugh that sounded more broken than bold. Silence? Oh, Mr. Wolfe, silence is never the end. But as Saul guided him out, silence was exactly what followed. Thick, heavy, and final. The kind of silence Wolfe prefers, the kind that says the case is closed, at least in his office. And me? I couldn't help thinking the gala was still ahead, and Harrow might not go quietly. Wolfe may have declared the play over, but I had the sneaking suspicion there was still an encore waiting in the wings. Divine's laugh was still hanging in the air when the door closed behind him. Wolfe did not move, which was typical, but the quality of his stillness had shifted. He wasn't finished, and I knew it. He took a long pull on his beer, set the glass down with precision, and then closed his eyes as if filing the night into a cabinet only he understood. Voss broke the silence. If it is truly him, if Divine is Harrow, then it's over. Wolfe opened his eyes just enough to look at her. Over is not a word I permit until it has been earned. What we have is exposure, not resolution. His motive, vanity clothed in sermonizing, fits. His access fits. His style fits. But fit is not proof. Proof will arrive in consequence. Until then, vigilance. Quan leaned forward, tension in every line of her body. You're saying he isn't finished? I am saying, Wolfe replied, that men who define themselves by spectacle rarely surrender with grace. Expect a final gesture. Perhaps at your gala. That did not sit well with Voss. She pressed her palms flat against her knees, steadying herself. If he still intends to disrupt it, then what do we do? Cancel. No, Wolfe said. That is precisely what he wants. His entire production has been aimed at forcing you to renounce the stage. If you withdraw, he wins. If you continue and he fails, his sermon ends as a farce. I could see the conflict tearing across her face, but pride and practicality teamed up and won. She nodded once. Then we continue. But how do we stop him? That, Wolfe said, shifting a fraction in his chair, will require foresight and bait. His eyes flicked to me. Archie, tomorrow you will accompany Dr. Voss and oversee every preparation for the gala. No delivery unexamined. No stranger unsupervised. Saul will join you. Mr. Cather and Mr. Durkin may also be summoned. Harrow has shown his impatience. He will strike again, and when he does, we will be waiting. The meeting dissolved soon after. Worth slipped out first, pale as chalk. Kells lingered long enough to glare at the bundled pumpkin on the side table before trudging into the night. Quan stayed until Voss rose, then left with her, both stiff-backed. Wolfe refused all further discussion. He rang for beer, drank it, and declared the evening closed. The next morning, Saul and I planted ourselves at the Institute. I have spent worse days than shadowing florists, caterers, and lighting crews, but not many. Every delivery had to be checked, every worker accounted for. Voss, under Wolfe's orders, gave me full authority, which meant I had the pleasure of being hated equally by everyone trying to do their job. Saul, as always, made it look effortless. By mid-afternoon, the ballroom had transformed. Autumn colors draped the walls, long tables gleamed under the chandeliers, and a display of pumpkins lined the stage. One of them was to be the star of the show, its stem wired to the mechanism Kells had perfected. According to him, a twist would release a stream of crimson made from beet extract, safe and natural. Not nearly as dramatic as blood, but no one outside this circle needed to know the difference. While Kells explained the mechanism to Voss, I kept an eye on the workers. One in particular caught my attention, a man lingering too long by the pumpkin display, his eyes shifting left and right. I strolled over, casual as a window shopper. "Nice gourds," I said. He startled, muttered something, and moved away too quickly. I caught his sleeve. "Hold it." "Name?" "Glenn," he stammered. "Part of the lighting crew." "Sure you are," I said, and signaled Saul with a tilt of my head. Saul drifted over, and in 30 seconds flat had verified Glenn wasn't on any roster. The man bolted, but Saul snagged him before he'd gone 2 steps. When we searched him, we found a vial in his pocket. The contents were unmistakably red. Too thin for paint, too dark for beet juice. I didn't need Wolfe's nose to know what it was. Voss went white. Blood again. "Not just blood," Saul said after sniffing. "This one's mixed. Animal, but treated with preservative. Somebody was planning to doctor your pumpkins a second time." We handed Glenn over to Quan, who marched him off with the efficient menace of a woman who could break ribs without leaving her desk. By evening, she reported back. Forged papers, no ID that held up, and the man wasn't talking. Whoever hired him had paid well and kept him in the dark. I phoned Wolfe with the update. He listened, made a sound like distant thunder, and said, "Of course, Harrow delegates the dirty work when the spotlight is too bright. Devine may be in custody, but his script is not yet burned. He has accomplices, or at least admirers. Keep watch. The gala is tomorrow. He will not allow his play to end in the wings." That night I went home bone-tired but wired. I couldn't shake Wolfe's words. If Devine wasn't working alone, then the encore I'd suspected was already warming up behind the curtain. And if Wolfe was right, tomorrow night the curtain would rise on more than a gala. As I locked the office, I caught Wolfe's silhouette in his chair upstairs, unmoving, implacable. He was waiting, letting the world stumble into his design. Me, I wasn't so serene. The gala promised music, donors, applause, and somewhere, Harrow's final act. And if I had learned anything in my years with Wolfe, it was this. When a zealot sets the stage, the trick isn't avoiding the play. The trick is making sure you write the last line. The gala night came on with a chill in the air, the kind that makes even the brightest chandeliers feel a little too sharp. By 7, the ballroom was crowded with donors, dignitaries, and hangers-on, all in their autumn finery. Waiters circulated with trays of sparkling wine, and Fritz would have had a coronary watching the hors d'oeuvres disappear two at a time. I was there in my best suit, officially as Wolfe's representative, unofficially as his eyes and ears. Saul moved through the crowd like a shadow, and Kwan's security people lined the periphery, stiff-backed and scanning. Dr. Voss made her rounds with the poise of someone balancing on a high wire, thanking donors, brushing aside questions about the rumors already circulating in hushed tones. Worth hovered behind her like a nervous footnote, sweating into his collar. Kells stood by the demonstration table, arms crossed, guarding the star pumpkin as if it were his child. And Devine wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the place. He was cooling his heels in police custody, or so we thought. At 8 sharp, the lights dimmed, and Voss stepped up to the podium. She welcomed the crowd, spoke of science and trust, of color and health, her voice steady, though her hands gripped the wood a little too tight. She introduced the centerpiece demonstration, the pumpkin that would bleed without harm. The donors leaned forward, eager for the spectacle. Kells took the stage, set the pumpkin at center, and explained the mechanism with the clipped tone of a man allergic to showmanship. He twisted the stem, and sure enough, a deep crimson stream welled out, flowing onto the silver tray beneath. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. To them, it looked like magic. To me, it looked like proof that for once the system had worked. But Wolfe had warned me about encores. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. A waiter, too interested in the table, angling closer than the tray demanded. He set down a glass and slipped a hand toward the second pumpkin in the display, the backup. His thumb pressed against the rind with too much intent. I moved before the thought fully registered. My hand clamped his wrist, and the tray he carried tilted, champagne spilling across the floor. The crowd laughed at the clumsiness, oblivious to the fact that my other hand was digging into his jacket pocket and retrieving a slim vial. The liquid inside was red, darker than beet, darker than wine. The waiter froze, caught. His eyes darted, desperate, until they landed not on me, not on Saul, who was already moving toward us, but across the room, toward the side entrance where someone was watching. And there he was, Aster Devine, out of custody, standing smugly in the doorway with a carnation in his lapel, as though this were his stage after all. He gave a little bow, mocking, and started to turn. Saul pushed past me and was halfway there before Devine could slip back through the door. The crowd stirred, confused, whispers starting to coil. Voss gripped the podium, pale but unshaken. I raised the vial high. "Ladies and gentlemen, pardon the interruption," I said, voice loud enough to cut through. "It seems one of your waiters brought his own vintage. Unfortunately, it's not fit for the menu." The donors laughed again, the tension sliding away like it had been scripted. But the laughter masked the truth. Devine wasn't done, and neither were we. Saul returned 5 minutes later, his face carved from stone. Gone, slipped out the side door into a service alley. Had a car waiting. I called Wolfe immediately, standing just outside the ballroom as music struck up again, the gala forcing itself back on track. Wolfe's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it sharper than usual. "I warned you he would not surrender. The man is a dramatist. Custody would not hold him if he believed the play unfinished. Did you secure the vial?" "I've got it." "Good. Return it here. The sample will speak. And Archie, do not assume this is his last gesture. He has revealed his accomplice in the catering disguise. That means there are others willing to play his chorus. He will not be satisfied until he sees the curtain fall on Voss herself." Inside, Voss was finishing her speech, reclaiming the night as best she could. The donors applauded, some sincerely, others in relief. But her eyes met mine across the room, asking the question she couldn't voice. Was it over? I shook my head, almost imperceptibly. Because Wolfe was right. Harrow wasn't finished, not yet. Tonight had been another act, loud enough to prove he still held the script. The real finale was still coming, and when it did, the stage wouldn't be the Institute or the gala hall. It would be Wolfe's office, because that was where all of Harrow's threads were already tightening, knot by knot. As I slipped the vial into my pocket and followed Saul back into the night, I couldn't shake Divine's mocking bow. He was a man who craved an audience, and he'd just promised his encore. Wolfe was waiting for him, immovable as ever. But me, I'd have to be ready for the scramble between acts. And if Divine wanted drama, Wolfe was preparing the kind no stage could withstand. By the time Saul and I got back to the brownstone with the vial, Wolfe was waiting like a judge already certain of the verdict. Fritz had cleared the desk of everything but a saucer, and the room smelled faintly of oregano and disapproval. I set the vial down, and Wolfe tilted it under the lamplight, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Unmistakable," he said. "Preserved hemoglobin. Animal, not human, but the intent is the same. Aster Divine sought to reprise his spectacle." He set the vial aside, folding his fingers over the mound of his middle. "You saw him?" "Yes," I said. Carnation in the lapel, smug as sin. Slipped out through a service alley before Saul could grab him. Which raises the question, how did he get out of custody? "Either through incompetence," Wolfe muttered, "or complicity. In either case, he is free, and that is intolerable. The gala was not his finale. It was merely rehearsal. He will return." "He's got nerve," I said. "Showing up in public when he knows we've already named him." "Not nerve," Wolfe corrected, "but compulsion. He must be seen or he does not exist. Such men cannot help but strut, even when strutting endangers them. He will appear again. The problem is where." Saul, standing by the globe, spoke for the first time since we'd entered. "If he's staging something, he'll want more than pumpkins and vials. He'll want an audience he can shock. Donors aren't enough. He'll try for press." Wolfe's lips tightened. "Exactly. Which means tomorrow's coverage will not be of your demonstration, Dr. Voss." He glanced at her, seated tensely in the red chair. "But of Harrow's interruption, if he succeeds." Voss's face was drawn, her voice flat. "I can't stop the reporters from writing about him. They already circle like vultures." "No," Wolfe said, "but you can dictate what they see." "Archie." "Yeah. You will accompany Dr. Voss to her institute tomorrow morning. You will remain by her side. Saul will watch the exterior. If Divine wishes to perform again, he will not wait long. He has allies, but he has not the patience to remain in shadows." That was Wolfe's way of telling me to expect fireworks before lunch. I nodded, already resigning myself to a day spent in citrus-scented lobbies and sterile labs. The next morning unfolded like Wolfe had written it himself. Voss arrived at the Institute to find reporters already clustered outside, shouting questions about the blood pumpkin scandal. Quan's security team was stretched thin, trying to keep the press at bay. I walked Voss inside with Saul hovering at the edges, his presence unnoticed but thorough. Worth was there, pale and stammering about damage control. Kells glowered at the headlines. Quan barked orders like a general on the losing side of a battle. All of them knew the gala had been only a partial victory. The question was what Divine's encore would look like. It didn't take long to find out. Around 11, a courier arrived. Different uniform this time, different company. He carried a crate, smaller than the first, but heavy enough to demand 2 hands. The receptionist signed for it automatically, and by the time I intercepted him, he was halfway to Voss's office. "Hold it," I said, blocking the way. "Delivery for who?" "Dr. Voss," he mumbled, eyes on the clipboard. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in straw, was another pumpkin, smaller but already seeping a faint line of red from a puncture near its stem. Attached to it, a card. This time it read, "The harvest ends tonight." Voss gasped. Quan swore. Worth turned green. I slipped the card into my pocket and snapped the lid shut. "Saul," I said, "follow the courier. Find out where he came from." Saul vanished like smoke, silent and quick. I turned back to Voss, who was trembling but steady enough to meet my eye. "He won't stop," she said. "No," I agreed. But Wolfe knew that, and that means he's already planning for tonight. We brought the pumpkin back to the brownstone. Wolfe studied it without touching, his eyes half closed. "Yes," he said softly. "Tonight." He could not resist declaring it. "Archie, summon them. All of them. Dr. Voss, Dr. Worth, Mr. Kells, Ms. Kwan, even Devine if the police are capable of fetching him. Tonight, in this room, Harrow will believe he has written the final act, but it will be I who delivers the epilogue." The note lay between us, its words stark against the cream card. The harvest ends tonight. And for the first time since the case began, I felt the weight of it settle. Devine had slipped the leash, had allies, had the taste for spectacle. Tonight the brownstone itself would be his stage. Wolfe had invited him, whether Devine knew it or not. I looked at Wolfe, calm as ever, and said, "Then I guess we'd better set the stage before he does." Wolfe inclined his head, satisfied. "Exactly. And Archie, make certain the pumpkin is placed where all may see. It began with a pumpkin. It shall end with one." The game was moving to its final scene, and Wolfe was ready to direct it. All that remained was for Harrow to take his cue. The summons went out, and by 8 that evening the office was arranged like a courtroom. Wolfe in his throne, the pumpkin set squarely on the side table, and chairs fanned out in their usual semicircle. Fritz had retreated upstairs, preferring pots and pans to drama, while Saul lingered by the door, silent and steady. The room felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. One by one they arrived. Voss, drawn but resolute, sat closest to Wolfe. Worth came next, pale and twitchy, carrying the air of a man bracing for condemnation. Kells entered stiff-backed, his jaw locked, eyes flashing whenever they strayed to the pumpkin. Kwan appeared in a tailored suit, her composure flawless, though I noticed the flicker of her hand near her hip each time the door clicked. And then Devine, freed once more, as though custody had never existed. He strode in with theatrical ease, a fresh carnation in his lapel and a smirk carved into his face. "I confess," he said as he took his seat, "I do admire this arrangement. A proper audience, a proper stage. Shall I begin with a monologue?" "You will not," Wolfe said, the words cutting through Devine's voice like a blade through silk. "You will listen." The silence that followed was brittle. Devine chuckled, but softer now, like a man trying to warm his own bones. Wolfe allowed it, then began. "You have all been inconvenienced by this. Man's vanity," he said, his voice slow and weighted. "But vanity alone does not explain persistence. Mr. Devine, you cloak yourself as Harrow, the scourge. Yet a scourge is useless without ground to harrow. You required a stage, yes, but more. You required an accomplice." The eyes in the room shifted. Voss froze. Worth flinched. Kells straightened, and Kwan narrowed hers into slits. Devine tilted his head. "Accomplice?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "The courier with the second pumpkin was not you. The forged waiter was not you. You are too visible, too flamboyant. You needed someone quieter, someone whose authority could open doors and whose certainty could conceal flaws." His gaze moved, slow as the swing of a compass needle, and landed on Violet Kwan. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Wolfe continued. "Ms. Kwan, you insisted your security system was flawless. Yet you admitted to a camera failure only when pressed. You controlled access, logs, oversight. Who else could guarantee that no trace of Devine's wanderings was recorded? Who else could dismiss anomalies as glitches, shielding him? You believed yourself justified, exposing the project's vulnerabilities to destroy what you considered a fraud. Harrow's words, "Seeds carry sins, harvests rot from the root," were not Divine's alone. They were yours, sharpened by his theatrics. The room seemed to contract. Worth made a strangled sound. Voss gasped softly, and Kells muttered a curse under his breath. Divine, however, laughed outright, clapping his hands once. "Bravo, Mr. Wolfe. You do have a flair for finale. But tell me, do you have proof, or only poetry?" "I have both," Wolfe said. He nodded at me, and I laid the broken syringe needle and the vial on the desk. The preservative in this vial was military grade, not available in culinary or commercial use. But Ms. Kwan, before her tenure here, served 3 years in logistics for a defense contractor. Her fingerprints, no doubt, are on the broken syringe fragment Archie retrieved from the locker. She provided the tools. You provided the stage, Mr. Divine. Together you thought yourselves prophets. Kwan's face didn't crumble, didn't flinch. She sat straighter, her voice even. "And why would I do that? To sabotage the very institute that pays me." "Because," Wolfe said, "you despise it. You see Dr. Voss's work as a masquerade, pandering to donors with flashy science. You allied with Divine because his spectacle matched your disdain. Together, you would ruin her credibility, end her project, and leave yourselves vindicated. But you forgot one thing." He leaned forward slightly, the mountain shifting. "I do not permit trespass in my house. And you trespassed. The pumpkin you sent here, the blood you spilled on my threshold, that was your undoing. You sought to summon me, but in so doing you placed yourselves under my scrutiny, and I do not fail." For the first time, Kwan's composure cracked. A muscle in her cheek twitched, her eyes flicked toward Divine, and that was enough. Saul moved, swift and silent, pinning her wrist before she could rise. Divine laughed again, but it sounded broken this time, brittle and hollow. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Mr. Goodwin, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him he may collect 2 gifts, one flamboyant, one taciturn, both guilty." I nodded, picked up the phone, and made the call. Kramer arrived within the hour, thunder in his voice but satisfaction in his eyes when he saw the evidence laid out. He took Divine and Kwan both, neither protesting now, both aware the performance was over. When the house was quiet again, Voss sat back, drained. "You've saved my work," she said softly. "But at what cost?" "The cost," Wolfe replied, "of revealing folly. That is always the price. Men and women who mistake vanity for vision invite their own ruin." He lifted his glass of beer, sniffed, and drank. The office was silent, heavy, until Wolfe added, "The sin was not in pigments or in pumpkins. It was in presumption, the belief that appetite can be manipulated by sermon. Appetite endures. Sermons rot." That was his final word. I escorted Voss out, saw her to her car, and when I came back in, Wolfe had already closed his eyes again, satisfied, his chair a fortress. The brownstone was quiet. Dinner would be late, but dinner would come. The case of the bleeding pumpkin was finished, and like every case Wolfe chose to touch, it ended not with spectacle, but with clarity. And me? I wrote it down, as I always do. Because if there's one thing Wolfe can't abide, it's a sermon. But he'll always make room for a story that ends with justice, served hot with beer.